Good morning, Mark.
He's connecting.
Yeah, I know. I see that.
See that.
Good morning, Mark. Nice to see you.
Morning. Nice to see everybody.
Hey there.
Hi, Mark.
James.
Let's see here. I'm gonna do a little light renaming.
Jim, I love the hat.
Thank you. How you doing?
Jim.
Good, thanks.
I always think I don't know why, Jim, but whenever I see that, I think it's duck hunting season.
Daniel Boone, right? That's what you think about.
Absolutely. Margie, do you know Jim?
I don't.
Oh,
Hi, Margie.
right. Well, let me introduce you to Master Networker Jim Reese.
Hello, Jim.
Thank
Nice
you
to
for the
meet you.
introduction.
Yeah, Jim's honestly is a powerhouse. I think he just won you won an award from the Maryland Chamber, right?
Yeah, the Central Maryland Chamber.
Central Maryland Chamber. Yeah.
What award?
Yeah.
Volunteer of the Year Award.
Wow, very nice. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you.
We're going through our process naming our small business and large business and nonprofit right now as we speak. After this meeting, that's what the next meeting I jump into. So that I know it's a lot of thought goes into choosing winners for these awards. So congratulations.
Thank you. It was very nice.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get to see Jim roughly every 2 weeks in another networking group that we're in, and Jim's presence online and everything he's doing with Offit Kerman is just remarkable. I'm just amazed. I mean, what are you running right now? 2 or 3 different networking groups. You have the various different, and you're doing the interviews now too.
Yeah.
So he's got a lot going on. You must have an unending sized LinkedIn profile in the meantime, in terms of all the people you're connected to.
It keeps me busy, that's for sure.
I was just happy to hit the 500 mark a year or 2 ago, because after that, people don't know how many I really have.
Right. You're in the 500 plus mark.
After I hit that, I was like, whatever.
You stopped at 501. That was brilliant.
Good morning, Gail. Welcome. It's good to see you.
Hey, Mark, I have to drop off at 10:30 to attend a virtual funeral, if you can believe that.
Oh my God. All right. That is not what one wants to be doing.
I have not done that, but I have to do this one.
I did a virtual wedding.
Yeah, so have I.
It sounds much better.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah, I have to agree with you. The circles of life, but I'd rather have the wedding.
I'm going to mute everyone and turn off your video so we can start our presentation shortly.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, it's 10:04. So I will handle the people coming into the room a little late, Mark. So I am Margie Graff. I'm the President and CEO of the Rockville Chamber of Commerce, and I want to welcome you all to our cybersecurity webinar brought to you by Digital Industries. And I'm going to turn it over to Mark Mazzaros, the owner of Digital Industry. They're a full-service IT sales and support organization, and cloud services and phone services. And Mark's been in the IT world for 22 years, right, Mark?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm gonna turn it over to you, and thank you very much. If you have any questions during the presentation, please put them in the chat and we'll address them at the end. Thank you so much. Over to you, Mark.
Thank you, ma'am. Well, I appreciate the introduction, and I'm going to go ahead and bring up my initial slide here. One moment. All right. Let's see. I believe I've decided to start with the presentation overview instead of the initial page, so I'm going to skip back. All right. Well, first off, I'd like to both say thank you and congratulations to everyone who is here today. As Margie's mentioned, my name is Mark Mazzaris, and I'm the CEO and VCIO for Digital Industry. I'm a CEO for my business, but I'm a VCEO for clients when I am still an active consultant. And as a small business in Montgomery County, that still does happen pretty frequently. So that's why I have that dual title. But as also Margie did mention, I've been the leader now here at Digital Industry, and it's in its previous incarnations as well. We have changed names as we've acquired different firms over the years, and that has been now also over 20 years. And in the 20 years, one of the hardest products to sell I've found is the need for cybersecurity. So I want to say congratulations to everyone who's here today, because as far as topics are concerned, what is plainly obvious to me, and has certainly been the case for the majority of the time that I've been involved in IT, is that we're being outplayed unendingly by those who really understand technology and don't have the moral compass to use it in an appropriate manner. The truth is that even organizations that I've heard descriptions of, from small to large, don't seem to really understand what they need to be doing within their cybersecurity. And I've over the years seen so many who have just ignored it, floundered, didn't implement. And again, I'm not even just talking about small businesses. I've watched large publicly traded companies also completely mishandle cybersecurity, at least as far as what my opinion is concerned. So in this presentation, I'm going to talk about a number of different items. One of the items that I'm going to talk about is why we need to do this. And for that, I've brought along some statistics that I'm going to read off to you. I'd like to make sure that you understand what is going on. So statistically, I want to make sure that you know that we are dealing with a situation where there's a break-in or a hack in the United States every 39 seconds. That 3 out of 4 small businesses say that they don't have the personnel to address IT security, and they don't, in fact, know how to even engage and to deal with it. 70% of breaches are done by external persons. 55% of that is made up of organized criminal groups, and 86% of the breaches are financially motivated. So that's really valuable information to know, because so often small businesses will take the attitude of, I don't have anything they want. And what I like to try to stress to folks when they say that is, of course you do. Because while they'd love to have 50,000 or much more money, they're happy to take your $500 as well. So you absolutely have something that they want, and if you're not paying attention and doing the best that you can to protect yourself, then you're making it easier for them, and then it's an easy $500 or $5,000 or $50,000. So in this presentation, we're going to talk about cybersecurity best practices and the process to go through to identify what it is to protect, smart budgeting as far as that is concerned, and of course, what's become unendingly important right now, or as far as I'm concerned, just one of those items that just has emerged in this pandemic period, as an absolute weak link and as being exploited because the unfortunate negative actors know that we are working remote, how to protect your remote workforce. And then training and some tools and guides that we have for everyone as well. So the first step is always going to be to evaluate your exposure. So the reason that I really start with this is we can start talking about, put on antivirus and make sure that you have your firewall tuned up and start talking about things like that. But really at the end of the day, we're in such an interesting time with cloud hosted services, local hosted items, distributed workforces, that the first thing that you really need to do before you try to throw a fence around these objects is understand what you have. Make a list and categorize what it is that you have that needs to be protected. Because it's not all just sitting behind a firewall within the four walls of your office, as it very likely would have been 10 years ago. So then you need to evaluate how you're handling these different places where data and information is being stored. And through that process, then we can identify where the weak points might be. So my suggestion is that you start off by creating a playbook. And remember that cybersecurity is not a single destination and I've done my cybersecurity, I'm done for now. It really is one of these unending journeys. It's a process and it needs to become culture within the organization. So my suggestion to any business owner or individuals is start by just simply making a plan. Don't just start by saying, I'll just grab this and that and a couple of other things. Stop, think about it, evaluate what you need to protect, and make a plan, right? And after that, you use some of the best practices. A layered security model is always the best. And when I say layered security model, I don't just mean a firewall on the edge and then another security tool set inside of that, but really recognize that different tools are going to be used to protect from different directions and different ways that we expose ourselves to the most dangerous place in the world, which is the internet, which of course isn't just the superhighway of information. It's also the superhighway to allow anybody in this world connected to it to potentially take advantage of you and steal your money, whether it's personal or business. And finally, there are organizations that are working hard to give us guidelines to help us think, to be the soup starter in our process. And they're right here. NIST is located right in Gaithersburg. They put together the 800-171 standard that now needs to be followed by many, many organizations, or as a framework for those organizations. And then, of course, all of us have to evaluate if we have a specific industry standard that we need to adhere to as well, HIPAA or PCI standards. And I'd like to point out, particularly for doctors' offices or otherwise, most of them are very well informed as far as that is concerned, but yet remarkably, we still see cases where they're being fined thousands and tens of thousands of dollars for violations of personal information and the way that they're handling that information. So in that planning, what I see is the keys to the plan is, as I've already advocated, to start with knowledge. Know what you have, know where it is sitting. That way you can understand the risks. If you are an individual who's chosen not to move anything into the cloud and therefore still store all files locally on a file server, if you're an organization or on your own computer, what does that mean risk-wise if you've chosen not to use Microsoft's OneDrive or Dropbox or a cloud-based file storage system? Well, at the end of the day, you probably still are using other cloud-based services. If you're a small organization, it's unlikely you're running your own email server. So that's going to be available online. So you need to understand, what are the risks? Where are you reaching out? How are my different applications functioning? And how are they protected? Well, let's not forget that if somebody gets a hold, or more importantly, not just to not forget, but really let's highlight the fact that if somebody gets a hold of your email account in the present environment that we operate within, there's a good chance that that person can crack open the majority of your life. They're going to likely see information that comes from your bank. Therefore, they're going to be able to establish where you're banking. They are likely then also to be able to do password resets if they can access your information when they're not when you're not online. They could easily go in, reset a password, and then delete the transaction that the password had been reset before you wake up in the morning. And that does happen. The next thing that we've seen is in platforms where folks falsely feel like they have some sort of protection, and Microsoft 365 and Gmail are places where these folks love to operate because they understand that the systems have features and complexities that small businesses and individuals may not understand. So we have found cases where every email that comes into the CEO of a pharmaceutical company was then passed onward to an outside anonymous email address, and they were basically able to monitor everything that this individual was doing. So you see these kind of behaviors and recognize that, you know, they were planning something larger. They were looking for a way to really damage this this organization, and so we have to be thoughtful about each one of these different platforms that we use. And do an accounting of what does it take to protect it? How am I behaving in a responsible manner? Have I even gone so far as to look at what the best security practices are that are published by, say, Microsoft or the vendor that you're using? And then, of course, how do you respond if something happens? You know, this is a little bit like the CPR training. None of us want to ever be involved in that. But one of our family members, when he was working in college at a restaurant, um, had a situation where one of the patrons at one of his tables began choking, and he was astounded that nobody acted. Nobody in the family knew what to do either, and finally he went and um, went and performed a Heimlich maneuver and saved that individual's life. And the reason that he could do so is because part of his college requirements for the program he was in gave him the opportunity to take first aid and CPR classes, and so he was in a position to know what to do. So in other words, have a response plan. Know what you're going to do. What happens if a member of the staff says something has happened? Or what happens if you suddenly realize money's departed from your bank account? And how are you going to respond to that? What are the steps? Don't wait for it to happen, because honestly, in the heat of the moment, we begin often to not think as clearly as if you would have planned ahead of time. So our best practices recommendations begins with planning and policies. And you'll see we step through 8 steps here, or 8 different recommendations. The first one is your cyber policies. So as far as your security policies are concerned, the one that I think is just about the most important is the network acceptable use. And the reason that this is so important is this is the document in which you designate to your staff how they are to operate. In other words, if you have a new person who comes on board, do they know that where data is to be stored? Do they know that files are to stay in the OneDrive system or the SharePoint system? That they shouldn't be creating other locations where files might be stored? Are they being told that local or remote workstations, particularly those that don't belong to the organization, are an inappropriate place to store the company's and the organization's information, that those items must reside within a framework of tools that the organization has designated as their workspace, and is then also putting together its policies to protect and take care of. And I think that as far as that's concerned, that really is one of those key documents, because all too often we find that staff are using a hodgepodge of different tools. There's so many different cloud tools that they begin opening accounts in different places. And even a business owner suddenly isn't aware where all of their intellectual capital and where all of their information is located and residing. And then, of course, the other pieces that make complete sense is your internet usage, as simple as you know, no use of inappropriate sites or otherwise, but also because those can be hotbeds for bringing on unintended consequences and payloads. A password policy, what you can and can't or shouldn't do within your social media. These are very important policies every organization really must have in place, so that you can inform your team of employees how they should be treating the corporate environment. And this is even more important when they see a blurred line between their home environment and the corporate environment. So within that, I always like to start with that bottom level once the policies are done. I like to look at what I consider the roadways and the bridges, the way that data moves around, so that network security. And the first thing when I begin this analysis is to say, let's start from the outside and work our way in slowly through all the different steps. If we were to imagine that it is a flow of water, how does that water flow in? If the information is water, how does it get to its end destination? And so the first thing that I want to do is pre-filter as much of that traffic as I possibly can. So external email pre-filtering, cutting down on the amount of noise that's coming in, managing it and putting tools out in front that may even reside external to the organization, so that less has to be handled by the organization's own resources. You certainly want to nowadays have a firewall that is capable of doing more than just simply stopping persons from the outside to walk straight indoors. Nowadays, you really need a firewall that's capable of doing what the TSA does before we get on an airplane, opening up and looking inside everything to make sure that there aren't unintended payloads, that someone hasn't accidentally clicked on something hostile is coming into the organization. Unfortunately, a lot of small businesses tend to rely on their providers for their firewall, so a Comcast device or otherwise, and these are the most basic of devices that have none of these types of tools. And the next item when it comes to relying on an outside provider, such as your carrier internet service provider, is were you part of their hiring process? Because if it's their device, then they have complete control, and you've basically left the border of your network in their hands, and that is absolutely not my recommendation. Our recommendation at Digital Industry is you should take responsibility at the firewall so that your policies can be enacted versus having to follow the tool sets and capabilities that were supplied by an individual whose primary job wasn't to provide you a firewall in many cases. And then you need to know what's going on around that edge point. So you have your intrusion detection. Of course, like one does within many other parts of security, separate your network into different sections. You know, many businesses, when you walk in, will separate different portions of their organization. You may be able to access the first floor and the fifth floor, but the finance department on the third floor, your card key won't give you access to it. Well, it should be really no different when it comes to how you segment and separate your data and the people who can access it on your network. And so you should be restricting them. And it's also for their safety at the end of the day. You don't want to leave something where they can accidentally come in and have an unintended issue where they're able to access information that they hadn't meant to and even cause damage to it. So at the office, as I said, restrict, make sure that you're only giving people access to the data that they must have. It's of course much easier and much less work if you just allow everybody carte blanche access across the board. But that isn't what would be the best tenet of security. You need to put everybody into different containerized areas so that they can stay within their own space without causing intended or unintended consequences in other directions. Physical security is, of course, part of what we're talking about as well. Just like you would lock up a safe, or you may provide your staff a lockable cabinet to keep a purse or other personals in when they're in the office, so too should you be locking up all of your key network tools that you have in the office, the centers, the switching, the telephone systems, if you still have one that's present in your office, and putting them away in a manner that not everyone can get to them. If nothing else, just simply that there isn't, again, an accident where in the process of cleaning or overnight servicing of the building, that somebody turns off systems or causes damage because it wasn't handled in a responsible manner. And of course, at this point, with so many people out of the office, definitely recommend that all data that leaves the office should be encrypted. This isn't a high bar to cross. All modern operating systems support it, and it really just needs to be something that has been implemented. And all those same rules now still apply to being away from the office and in working with home networks as well. The next area that unfortunately becomes a very commonplace and for folks to be abused is in the updating and maintaining of applications. It's such a simple process in most cases, and yet we find that entire organizations don't maintain and keep up their software. And that means that when Microsoft or Apple realize that there is an error within their system and release a patch for it, we'll find organizations that for one reason or another don't apply those. And that means that the common knowledge of what that exploit was grows in time, and you have less and less capable people who have scripts and other tool sets that can take advantage of it, therefore exposing that risk and having it grow over time. Now, should patching and updating just simply be done blindly? And the answer is absolutely not. An organization of some manner should be providing you some assistance with this. In a home environment, you might allow Apple or Microsoft to do this process for you. But in most all businesses, one really should have somebody who's doing this with some thought and intelligence, because unfortunately, that same patching and updating can break operations as well. And in fact, the most recent example of this that I can think of is that Apple just released a new version of its operating system for iPad and iPhone. And don't know, I suspect there was something more going on, but they released it quickly and without the amount of pre-advanced notice that they normally give. And this caught many software applications by surprise. There was a lot of complaining, but it is as it is. So there were a number of different pieces of software that were effectively broken if you updated your device. And obviously, that's the last thing we would want in a corporate environment. So we always need to evaluate and test. And this is one area where patching and updating is critically important and shouldn't be left unattended. But it doesn't necessarily mean you want to be the first persons to do it either. you may want to balance that with a little bit of thoughtfulness as to what's the risk and how long should I wait to see if this particular change to my system is going to impact in a negative manner. Of course, the basic tools that we all should have: a firewall also running on our own local computer, antivirus and anti-malware. These are not even questionable tools, whether you're in the Mac environment or whether you're in a PC environment. They absolutely just must be there because all of these tools are human, man-made, and all of them are going to be susceptible to one form or fashion of abuse through these types of attacks. And finally, I say finally because I see this as the back end of a process. We're not done after this, but of a planning process to a certain extent, and that is that we have to remember that we will not be able to prevent everything. We're going to occasionally run into difficulties and have problems. We are going to have a ransomware breakthrough periodically. And as I just heard from a colleague, that her spouse, the law firm, was in fact shut down because over the weekend, even though it was a multi-location law firm, the ransomware got through. And I can't even imagine exactly what the actual cost now was to the organization to have multiple locations of a law firm shut down and unable to operate even as much as sending email. That had to have been really an awful scenario to be in for the responsible parties who were the IT side of that organization. You've got to have a disaster recovery. You've got to be able to work your way back. You have got to look at it from the lens that that if I end up in a scorched earth situation, how am I going to get folks back operating? And in fact, as it says right on the slide, can you meet your MTTR, your mean time to recover? Is the plan that you have going to get folks back into operation in a balanced time frame? And what I mean by that is you have, you certainly can set up systems where you can stand yourself back up again very, very quickly, but there's a high cost that will go with maintaining duplicated systems, near offline systems that are ready to come back online. Now there's been huge advances in this area, and we have lots of great solutions that can bring systems back online within an impressively short period of time. But you do have to balance the cost to what's right for the organization. And that's, again, done by defining what are our essential and critical data, what can we live without for a longer period of time versus what do we have to have back most quickly. Go through and plan this well before you ever get to a place where you're in a situation that you actually have to rely on it to keep your organization and staff functioning. And finally, cyber education. Really, actually, at this point, probably should be with a little asterisk, an exclamation mark, and an extra star, because right now we have this being one of the primary ways that systems become violated. And that's even more so with folks working at home and remote. They feel safe within their own homes. They're lowering their guards. They're not thinking about that IT environment the same way as when they're in the four walls of the office. And in many cases now we've also had the introduction of non-corporate devices as the vehicle by which folks are working from home. Those devices haven't been managed and don't adhere to the same security practices that the corporate machines have been managed with. And believe me, that's fully known to the attackers. They are making that home machine right now a desire, a very, it is unfortunately a very desirable and attractive way for folks to get in, because they know that those machines very likely are being used by multiple family members, that they can get in through a son or a daughter who's using the machine for entertainment purposes in the evenings. So we really need to work on cyber education, and this needs to be done through constant learning programs that teach our staff what to look for and how to respond when they see it. We can do everything in the world, but at the end of the day, we have to allow the staff to be able to work in the system, or the system has no value. So if you create a security such that the staff can't work, well, then you've really defeated the whole purpose. On the other hand, if you give folks the keys, then if they mishandle the keys, your corporate information has just become, unfortunately, available in the hands of persons that you may not want it to. And again, we're going first and foremost, recognizing that this could very likely be bank account and other information that would allow them to steal that money, the things that they're most of the time, nearly 90% of the time, is simply what they're after. And then finally, test. Make sure your staff really knows what they're doing. Give them a chance, just like any other skill that you teach them, to show you that they have learned, so that you can make sure to have a continuing education program that actually is achieving the end goal. And as part of that, let's stop and think one more time about that remote workforce. They're working on devices that may be supplied by the organization, may be supplied by themselves. How are they accessing the corporate data? Are they downloading it to their own local self-owned personal machines? Do they have secure pathways? I think you'll also find that more and more insurance companies in the cybersecurity fields are looking and are aware that this is a risk location. So putting in the policies and guidelines of how the staff should be working is very important. It really goes back to the acceptable use that we spoke of much earlier. How does an employee behave? What tools should they be using? Where should they be storing the corporate data? Because there's really a bleed going on right now of corporate intellectual property being disseminated out across devices that the corporation does not have control of. This is something that we're talking about in the industry, what we're going to do about the fact that you have this going on. And at the moment, it's a process that we all have to work through, because we can't just stop organizations from working, but we also recognize that we've opened up terribly risky processes, procedures, and ways that folks are working. Some of the basics that we ask in that security side that folks should be working on is just basic password hygiene. So we've all had these discussions at this point, or been told by folks that passwords need to be of a certain length, applications require it. The problem is that a lot of folks still duplicate and use the same password over and over again, or they have a group of passwords that they use. We really need to have our user base, until passwords, which folks predict one day we won't have passwords, we'll have other logon methods, but that hasn't happened as yet. So in the meantime, right now, we need to do a more responsible job with our passwords. Use a password manager so that you can have a unique and different password. My password manager has just surpassed 500 passwords, which is insanity. But between all the different personal and work-related places that I log in, it's just the situation. Unlike my LinkedIn connections that I was trying to ensure were over 500, I had no goal of making my passwords manager hold more than 500 passwords, but it has happened. And if I'm trying to not duplicate a password, because if the one system is compromised, now my password's exposed. And that same password being used over and over again is, again, something that is well known in the hacking community, that if you have the password from an individual, you have a good chance of having that same password used again and again with other places that they log into, even their bank accounts potentially. So change those passwords periodically. Have your own cycle, even if it's not required by the organization, to change those out. And you use multi-factor. If you're logging into your bank, corporate or personal, and not having some sort of a multi-factor system at this point, then you're really doing yourself a disservice and creating an inappropriate risk that I would strongly recommend that you act quickly to change. And finally, again, because we know that we can't prevent every situation, that occasionally things will happen. If the Department of Defense can't prevent folks from breaking in with the amount of money they spend on it, then enterprise businesses or small businesses or individuals are not going to be able to be 100% secure either. And that's why we have insurance. Now, liability insurance, the cyber liability insurance industry, as I mentioned earlier, they are growing. The questionnaires that we help our clients fill out nowadays have become far more pointed. They're now asking specific questions like, how is your remote workforce doing A, B, and C? They are aware. They know what they're paying out on. They know how things are transpiring, and they're beginning to press harder and harder that we put more and more systems in place if we would like to have the liability insurance. It's been a dramatic increase in this last year compared to the relatively soft and gentle questions that they asked for most of these policies in previous years. So we know that we're going to need to do this if we're going to have our liability insurances, and be aware too that they're auditing, they're checking, and if we don't follow the procedures or have the processes in place, we risk potentially not having that insurance cover the issue. We talked about the importance of a response plan. So we wanted to give you a few details and suggestions as far as that is concerned. One, if you believe that something has happened, act immediately. Have steps that contain the breach. And as I've told folks before, there's nothing wrong with disconnecting your device from the internet. Sometimes it's best not to shut it off, but disconnect it. Turn off the Wi-Fi connection. Disconnect the cable from the wall, and make sure that you have, as part of your documentation and what you're writing down as transpired, also, who do I call? Who do I talk to? Do I call Mark right now, or the folks at Digital Industry? Do I have my own IT person? Who is the person that I contact? Make sure you know that right from the get-go. Also, make sure your staff knows this and that you have that response plan. What if you're out of the office or on vacation? Will your staff respond correctly? Will they mitigate the damage? Will they document the information such that you won't have any problem with an insurance claim if it comes down to it? So, a quick recap. It's time to create a plan. It's probably the single most important thing that I would wish anybody who is able to do, or who is also in attendance to do, and that is take, if nothing else from this presentation, the intention to create a plan for yourself. Make sure that you do a security audit. Make sure you know what you're protecting. Make sure your staff and your colleagues know where they're supposed to be keeping the corporate information. Make sure it's clear to them that to put it in other places is against company policy, so that the security audit you do covers the intended tool sets that the organization wants to pay to secure. Make sure you do the basics, the firewall, restricting access, patch management, and password. And of course, back up your data. Encrypted backups nowadays online are not a high bar to cross, and they are your path back from the worst possible day that you could have. And in many situations, it could be a quick path back. And make sure that you both have your insurance and your education in place. Now, we're providing for everybody within our client base, and of course, everybody in attendance, small business guides. We have a number of them that are available at our website, /free-guides. We're trying to help create those different plans that we talked about. So the disaster recovery plan, checklists, so that it gives you the soup starter, to use that term again, that information to get started, not on just simply buying antivirus, but simply really planning how you're to go forward. And so I want to thank everybody who's been in attendance. We certainly are available if there's anybody who has questions. Margie, I'm going to turn things back over to yourself.
Thank you so much. Oh my God, Mark, that it's scary at the same time. You know, it's so important. A lot of people don't, I think, are scared to do updates, because what happens if, you know, it's not a good update, you know, they have the wait and see thing. I can tell you personally, at my other chamber in Vermont, I was away for the weekend and somebody hacked into the website and turned it into a porn site. And I was like calling, freaking out. You have to know who to call also when there's an emergency. That's very, very important. I want to go into the chat for a second. Mark had asked, what is meant by segmenting Wi-Fi?
So the common ways that we often segment Wi-Fi for organizations is to have equipment that's capable, so you don't have to put out multiple pieces of equipment, but one system that's capable of providing access to the corporate network. That would be for equipment that's owned by the organization. So a laptop or a device that belongs to the organization. Then having a second connection, or effectively system, through which staff members can connect their personal devices. You know, it's so very common nowadays to have folks with their iPhones, and it's common for us to allow them to have the corporate email on those devices. But those devices aren't necessarily managed by the organization, and you don't know what those devices were being used for in the previous week. So you don't want to put them into the corporate and enterprise network. But they are becoming valuable business tools. So to provide them a good internet connection does make sense. So we segment and create two different ways to get into the network. One goes straight to the internet for the corporate devices for the devices that are not corporate owned, and one that is corporate owned that goes straight into the regular network. But again, only devices that are managed and owned by the organization should go there. And finally, that also gives us a path that if we have guests who come in, they would also be able to join on the network that only goes to the internet, effectively giving them that Starbucks-like access, so that they can have the access, be able to do the work, come in and do a presentation in your conference room, but that you're not including them into your corporate network.
Thank you. I think JC answered Mark's other question. Do I need antivirus on my cell phone? The answer was yes. Do you have
Yeah, you know, that's going to be increasing in time. And my answer is I would. They're all little PCs, right? And this is the amazing thing about this. Our Fire Sticks that we hook to our TVs, or that come as part of the television itself, all of these devices, they're Android based, or if it's an Apple TV, then it's iOS based. And the amazing thing is that all of these devices can be compromised, and there's a lot of information that's given away or access into your home that can happen when these devices are compromised. And this really speaks to when I look out across the landscape of how folks treat security, yet how pervasive we've made these intelligent devices, these little mini computers that sit all over the place. It's what a time to be a criminal. You don't even have to get out of your chair. Folks are making tool sets available for you to break in across the globe, which is why I think I've just recently, maybe you remember JC, but I believe that one of the stats that just made me shake my head the other day was that cyber crime is going to exceed the global illicit drug trade, right? And in terms of the amount of money that they're making. And they're making it off of people like us, $500 or $5,000 or $50,000 at a time. And it's also devastating to hear about large organizations that have had to pay cyber criminals to get control of their networks back. And I've now heard about numerous large brand name organizations that paid millions of dollars in ransomware to get control back. That's a disaster at so many levels. It's a disaster to the organization. It's a disaster to encouraging that behavior to continue, because when you make millions of dollars doing something, Lord knows you're going to do it again. And it's a disaster of mismanagement, because how can an organization that has the ability to pay millions of dollars to a cyber criminal not have plans in place and processes in place to deal with it?
Okay, one other
Mark?
question.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, one other question was, is Dropbox a good enough backup plan?
Dropbox itself has, so my answer to that is no. That is to say, most of the online systems, Microsoft 365, Dropbox, have some level of recovery. You accidentally delete a file, not in every circumstance, but in most circumstances, you can usually recover that again. But what you need to look at is what's the window of time? A number of these systems have also started shortening how long they'll keep your files before they're expunged, so that if you didn't notice that you deleted it and 30 days later you go to undelete it, it may be gone. So my answer is that you should look into Dropbox. Has into the services. They have additional services for actual retention. It's going to, of course, be an add-on service, but you want to look at that to see, which one of them meets your the needs that you have to recover lost or damaged information. I'm a big fan of Dropbox, but whenever we use it with corporations and clients, we do what's called cloud-to-cloud backup. I don't like to use the same organization that is my system to also back up the data. In other words, I don't use Microsoft to back up Microsoft. I'll have my Microsoft 365 environment, but I will use a company that specializes in backing up Microsoft, because that way I know that Microsoft has a problem. Why pay the same amount of money to that organization again to back themselves up? Instead, I go to a third party that specializes in doing this, and that way if things really go wrong, I have two different vendors who can help us out of a problem instead of trying to solely rely on one vendor, even if it is a Microsoft.
Okay, Mark, I have a personal question. When you're in a bank or you're doing anything online and it says use your saved password, Is that a safe thing?
Well, that is because the reason you're getting that nowadays is that more and more applications are, particularly the browser space, are um, trying to provide you a password manager. So using one of the password managers supplied by, whether it is Firefox or it is the Apple system, would be fine as far as my recommendation, as long as you're aware and then treat the data accordingly. So in my case, while the majority of our clients use Microsoft products, and we're of course a Microsoft partner, I personally use Apple products. So I have an Apple MacBook in front of me, I have my iPad, and I have my, of course, iPhone. And I therefore use my the Apple keychain system to store my passwords. And that system works very nicely for me because it does what you just said. I'm able to have 500 different passwords that are encrypted and kept in a secure container only within my devices. And of course, also in the back end that ties it together, which is the iCloud. Now, that folks will point out, well, that means that, you know, folks make it into iCloud, they don't have to get to your device, they could get your information right there. And the answer is yes, that is correct. But it is in an encrypted format. This goes under the category of nothing is perfect, but it's the best solution that I can put together for myself right now to have an encrypted location to hold my diverse passwords. So the answer there is, I like that kind of a system because it means that it will encourage you to have a different password for, or be able to manage a different password for all the different banks that you're going to, Margie. But I still also would encourage then a second factor authentication. In other words, a simple example of this is, I think that we see it all, and we're all dealing with it now, is, you know, if you set up PayPal or otherwise, they'll text you a code that you have to put in and give that second factor. Anything financially related, and I mean anything, whether it's the TIAA Craft retirement accounts or your financial planner or your bank. I wouldn't do business with any organization that isn't giving me second factor authentication and is handling financial transactions for me in any manner. It's just far too risky. And even as an IT professional, I'm constantly aware that something can slip and go wrong. And before I know it, somebody is capturing my keystrokes, and then my passwords are worthless. And the only thing that stops them from getting into Citibank is that second factor authentication.
Great. Thank you so much. Anybody have any other questions for Mark and his team?
Well, Margie, I've got unendingly further information to go over. I mean, so many things to say, but we have to somewhere you know, draw the line and say, this is as much as I can present in this moment of time. I just want to say again, if both on the personal and professional level, the most important thing is stop, think about all the different tools you're using, and put together a plan.
And call Digital Industries because I think that's the most important thing, is to be able to pick up the phone if something goes wrong. You know, I don't know about anybody else, but I need to talk to somebody immediately, you know, if something happens. So, you know, I want to thank you so much. And Mark is asking if there's can we get a copy of this presentation?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. We'll have a PDF copy of the presentation and a few deliverables. We'll send those through you, Margie, and then take it from there.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank everyone for attending. This was, you know, a good event.
Thank you so much for sponsoring, and we're setting up our next year's programs already and hoping to continue to partner with Digital Industries to keep providing you with all the latest information and what to do and what to look for. And again, Mark and JC, thank you so much. And thank everybody for being on today.
Thanks again. And thanks, Margie.
Thank you, Margie. Talk to you guys. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you.